Hey guys, happy 2020, and we pick it up where we left it, and that is the Porsche 911 GT3 Assetto Corsa Competizione in Nürburgring, and we were looking at aerodynamics. What you see right now on your screen might be a bit overwhelming, but we'll get there. This is a dedicated sheet I built in Motec to assess the aerodynamics of the Porsche a little better, and hopefully we'll get there in a bit. For now, let's switch back to the game because there's a couple things that I have experienced when playing around with the setup. So what I did the other day, I think I went down with the rear ride height because we don't see any balance change from 70, 71 millimeters down to 63. So when the balance stays the same, you would say, well, okay, why not lower the center of gravity? Because it's generally a good idea. So I did that. And yeah, of course, I've been testing a little more and I've been looking at Motec. And after all, I found, well, exactly there is a bigger trade-off than just having the same balance and a lower center of gravity. In fact, the balance does change, but not with a stationary car where this aerodynamic here is calculated. Um, Another thing that I noticed is, right, you can test the balance here with fuel load, and if you put 50 liters, well, it's pretty much what I set up. But if I go here and add fuel down to the minimum 2 liters, if this is disabled, then the balance is the same. But if I add 50 liters here now, all of a sudden the balance is quite different. So I wonder how the fuel load test calculation here in ACC actually works, because I have a feeling it's already happening here. This is a bit weird, but when this is off, there's absolutely no calculation. So if you do this disabled, you can do set whatever here, and it stays the same. It's weird. While you can just watch at the car back here, and I increase the fuel load, it will move. There you go, it moves it down a bit. And if I decrease the fuel, it comes up. There you go. So this already does affect the car in the background at least, but it doesn't seem to affect, right, that also has an effect, but it doesn't affect the aero calculation. So lowest here, highest here, gives a very weird front biased aero balance, which of course makes sense with the fuel load, but then which of those values is actually doing it? And we get 7% if I add 120 liters here and, well, almost nothing here. But if I add 120 here and 120 here, it's back to the 4.3% we had earlier. And this really, I don't know, doesn't freak me out. But for now, for our purposes, I think the best working forward way is to add 50 liters, well, the same amount here in the setup and here in the fuel load test to get reliable values. Lesson learned. All right, so I drove the car with those 63 millimeters rear ride height, and now I drove it, and then I figured that, well, on some occasion, especially when I go on the throttle, it understeers a bit, and going into the corner, it understeers a bit, even though the balance is kind of all right in the setup screen. But the setup screen doesn't account for velocity. So if we now go to Motec, and I do need to remind myself to turn off the game screen on top of it. Can we actually silence that game? Give me a second. Never mind. You hear the guy speaking. And so back in Motec, let's see what is actually happening here. This is a lab that I'm showing you right now, where I used this 63 millimeters on the back. And let me talk you through quickly through this sheet. We have up here the front left tire, front right, rear left, rear right tire. Each showing pretty much the same values. We don't need the rake twice because it's the same front and rear, of course. Now, what we see is the suspension travel being inverted to, or rather mirrored to the ride height, because of course the ride height changes with suspension movement, and the same we see for all 4 tires. Additionally, we have only care for the green one for now. So actually I'm going to turn the others off for the time being. So we just have the green right here to see the rake of the car, and we don't mind about differences left to right. Doesn't matter too much in our case right now. Let's go to turn 1 then, and well, actually to the main straight. Where are we? That is the old lap, that is the new lap. First thing we can see here is that the rake throughout the straight, right? You see the dot down there moving left and right on the straight. We see that the rake angle changes once we go along the straight, which happens because as the car goes faster, especially the rear stops producing way more downforce from the rear wing and from the diffuser, pressing the car down on the road, which means the difference in ride height front to rear changes in, changes in favor of the front. Hard to tell. Well, definitely though, the front starts getting higher than the rear, and the rake angle is usually the rear ride height subtracted the front ride height. So you usually get a positive angle. So as we go down the straight, we can see the rake getting negative because the rear is being pressed down on the ground so fiercely. So that means the downforce on the rear is very much at that point. So you could pretty much drive any corner flat out without having fear of the rear stepping out or so, because the aero balance is shifted way rearward right now. So in that case, as say for medium to high speeds, the rake angle is an indication of how your aero balance is in any specific moment on the track. So the moment let's complete the sheet first. So we have the steering angle as well, we have the throttle position, braking. Don't mind the other graphs here, they go into more detail that we don't need right now. Track map. And now you can see as we go onto the braking zone in turn 1, all of a sudden the rake increases a lot. So from negative 10, 12 something up to 20 millimeters difference front to rear. So the rear goes up, the front goes down as we touch the brakes. And not only the rake changes, but the whole aero balance of the car, and so the balance of the car in general changes. So right now the car will be very susceptible to steering changes, and the rear will start, well, in the worst case, the rear starts dancing around because it doesn't have the traction that we want. Let's go a little further along here. We can see once I go out of the brake and go into the corner, let's zoom in a bit right here. As I go out of the brake, the front comes up again a bit, so the rake angle gets more neutral again, and the aero balance shifts again more to the rear. So we get some stability back that we didn't have under braking, but therefore we're braking in a straight line. Thinking straight line, sometimes we don't brake in a straight line, but in a corner. And braking into a corner with a very high rake angle, well, that can cause trouble and very oversteery entry into a corner. Now we can see something happening in turn 1, and I really suspect this to be the bump that is in the road in turn 1. So the moment the front jumps from, kind of jumps down into corner 1, the suspension compresses and the aero balance changes again because the rake angle changes and all that. Then you can see here I start, exit of the corner, I start going into the throttle, and as I do that, we can see the whole car pitch rearward again. So the front lifts up, the rear goes down, and the rake angle changes, and with it the whole balance of the car changes. So now we have 3 different scenarios with the same basic ride heights that we set up, and you can see that under braking the ride heights change a lot. So we have a high rake angle. Going into the corner it decreases a bit, and exiting the corner we have a very low rake angle. and with the rake angle, the aero balance of the car changes a lot, of course. And this is what was the problem with the change I made to the setup from 70 to 63 millimeters. Now that the car was so low to the ground on the rear, I always ended up having a very much downforce on the rear under acceleration. So I didn't really have the aero balance that the setup screen was giving me, but a rather different one. And let me now, for comparison, show you another lab that I did where actually, therefore, I want to show you the standard rake again. Don't hide it. So this is some sort of average ride height. We can see that much of, let's say, half of it is positive, half of it is negative, actually more into the negative. And we want to go to that lab now. At first, it looks similar, but the problem is that the ride height channels I built, they don't account for the ride height change I do in the setup, so I have to do it manually each time. So this is the rear ride height, which I changed from 63 back up again to 71. And I did this for both rear, of course, as I can't set it up individually, to be honest, so I have to do both here. And now we have quite different rake angles. So let me hide the average again. And now you can see that we hardly ever go negative, right? Do you follow me? So being on the main straight, the rake angle still changes as the car goes faster, but end of the straight on very high speed, nearly 240, 242.5 kilometers an hour, we still have a rake angle. So the aero balance doesn't shift as rearward as it did before, because we don't get such a negative rake angle, actually not a negative rake angle at all. Going into turn one, then of course the same pattern happens. The car squats forward, pitches forward. The rear goes up. The balance changes, of course, in the corner too. But now, same point. Once I hit the accelerator, and the lap before, we had the rake angle go negative. So we had a lot more rear downforce than we had at the front. And now this aero balance shifted in a way that we compared front to rear, the front has a bit more downforce left, and this creates a bit more rotation and less understeer. On the other hand, let's go a bit further where I noticed the problem. Whoops, I have to zoom out a bit and move along here. Let's go, where is it, to the Schumacher S. So we're accelerating here. You can see that pretty decent by the rake angle becoming less and the rear squatting down. And then once I go out of the throttle, and you see I already start to turn as well, I really expect the rake angle to change a lot towards the front, which doesn't quite happen, really. Because, let me see, the rear does compress and the front compresses a little less. So that now is a different effect, so that we have a high-speed corner. Being in the corner, we still have downforce being effective. So that keeps the rear attached to the ground, so it doesn't go up as much as it did under braking for turn one. Do you follow? I know it's difficult, but you'll get there. So now that we have a high-speed corner and we have downforce, and the rear overall generates more downforce as we go along. It also keeps a different balance into the Schumacher S, and we don't see a high rake angle happening here, even though I go out of the throttle here. So where is that? So the car decelerates. So you would expect it to move forward a bit, right? But it only does so a little, and it's actually, I think I come from the outside curb right there, so the rear is jumping from the curb, being squatted down, produces a lot of downforce, and stays sucked to the ground. So the front doesn't go down as much, the rear doesn't go up as much, the rake angle doesn't get as high. So we have way more aero balance to the rear than we had in corner 1. So we can now do the high downforce corner a lot better than we could before, but we still have a slightly positive rake angle, whereas the lap before with a lower rear right from the start, where we had a negative rake angle through the Schumacher S, which made the car way more understeery through there. So we do keep some, well, it's not actually oversteer, right? But the car turns better and you feel better, feel more comfortable. But now let's go to a more tricky point, which isn't here, but for example, this one is tricky. So we're now into the downhill right corner of the Nürburgring. And what you can see is now that we are not going as fast, so we're not at 180 or 200, but only 150, 140 and getting slower. And we're braking, which we didn't do in front of the Schumacher S. We see the whole rake increasing again, so the car tilts forward and we have an aero balance change that's quite severe. So we will definitely see oversteer going into that corner and being here. You can't see it because the oversteer calculation is based on accelerations. That won't work. However, you get turn in oversteer quite a lot and the car becomes unstable and you won't really like it, let me tell you that. And the same is true if we go a little further in the lap, approaching the chicane. Sorry for that. I have to move this along here again. There we are at the chicane. You can see there's a lot of suspension movement happening. The ride height on the rear changed a lot, goes up, goes down. Same is this synced now? Yeah, this seems synced again. So right here we have a high rake angle, so the car is rather unstable going into the chicane. You will definitely feel that. But since generally the overall downforce is, or to me the overall balance throughout the lap is a lot better, this is definitely a direction I want to go. And we can adjust this further with how the dampers behave or how we change the bump stops, for example, on the car. So to conclude the video and not extend this into forever, let me just drive the two laps in comparison, talk you through, and current setup, load the, that's the old one. Let's take that one, I think it was that. We have the 63 in the back here. And we have the old version, which I thought was better in terms of center of gravity, blah blah. But you will see that we have quite some understeer in many parts of the track. It's very stable, and probably for someone who just wants to do some fun races, this is probably a way to go. But you can already see the car understeers like hell. You will feel safe, but you're not necessarily fast, and you have to be very patient. So you can't go fully on the throttle there. Right, I get understeer as soon as I touch the throttle, just because the rear is already tucked to the ground. And here I don't really get the turn in, have to play with the throttle to get the car rotated. It's very stable on the braking, so I can really go fast into here while braking. But on the exit again, I have to wait for quite some time before I can hit the throttle because the car will understeer so much, so I have to put a late apex in the corner. Also here it's very stable, really no fear. Even though you take the curbs, the car will stay quite stable. Let me do one more lap with a little warmed up tires and some pressure in. Ah, a bit too far. But that happens when you have understeer on corner exit. Roll now very late on the throttle. Bit deep. Now take a look how late I have to put the apex before I hit the accelerator, because the car will understeer towards Nirvana. And now same here. Have to wait quite some time before I can put the power down. Stable but understeering. Wait again a long time. Understeering. Just about a 54. So let's go back to the pits, do the change. That's really the only change I do, is increase the ride height to 71, which gives the same balance inside the screen with the stationary car or whatever this is calculated on. We go back to the track and let's do 2 quick laps again. In theory, I of course, since the balance is different, I would have to adjust the pressures again to cope with the rear tires now producing more heat as they rotate more. So the pressure will likely be a bit too much on the rear, maybe too few on the front now. But the rotation now, you can feel it's already a lot more. Actually some oversteer. And through here probably way better turn in. Car turns so much that I actually hit the grass on the inside. And here it will be a bit unstable on entry, but then once you hit the throttle, it really pays off. So now hopefully I'm able to produce a faster lap time and don't die in the chicane. See how much further inside I can be? So let's hope I can convert. way early on the throttle and still way more inside. Well, the line in the corner wasn't good. Look how early I'm on the throttle there. Maybe half a second, maybe even a second earlier. Bit wide, but the rotation is there. I really hope this lap's faster. So that's just half a second, and I haven't really adapted even to the setup yet, and they saw all the errors. So I don't know, maybe 6, 7, 8 tenths maybe just by a couple clicks on the rear axle. I'd say we call it a day because one setup change covered in about 30 minutes or so. Questions, put it in the comments. I guess we'll pick it up sooner or later with optimizing the dampers, springs, and everything else on the car. Cheers, happy 2020.